Is it possible to criticize Israel without being anti-Semite? Yes. Is it possible to criticize any tenet of Islam or the behavior of any Muslim without being accused of Islamophobia? No. I mean, people think anti-Semitism is overused. Wait till they see Islamophobia. That is just, people get hosed down by that. And I reject it because, among other things, well, first of all, it's inexact as a term because a phobia is an irrational fear of something. And there's every reason to have a rational fear of aspects of Islam. Fundamentalist Islam is something one should be rationally fearful of, concerned about, worried about. You know, we all have problems in our communities, in different religions. We all have problems. We've all had big problems in our past at some point, sometimes for a very long time. But you cannot tell me that if there was a sect of the Mormon church that was going around preaching the killing of another minority, we would expect our Mormon friends to face down that group.
That's true.
And sure, there are crazy Christians, there are some crazy Jews, and there are some crazy atheists, and all this is, yeah, okay. But we would expect at the moment that violence was normalized, even by a single-digit percentage or approved of by a low double-digit percentage of people, you would expect that group, whoever it was, to confront it head on and to say, no, we're not doing this. So why does that not happen more? And why is it that instead people have charges of Islamophobia and of far-right bigotry or of racism and so on? And I'm afraid it's to be my kindest in the interpretation of this, it's a demonstration that, like so many other groups and religions and sects, the Muslim world does not want to air its dirty laundry in public. It does not want to have this discussion publicly. It does not want to have it in particular with non-Muslims, and it wants it to go away, and it wants to demonize anyone who points to it, including Muslims. So, you know, I mean, we saw how long it took, for instance, for the child sex abuse scandals in the Catholic Church to come out because of the unwillingness of seeing people right up the top of the hierarchy in the clergy to allow the church to be dragged through what was going to happen if this came out. And we had, you know, we know the decades of cover-up. The Muslim world has that, and they are so far away, it seems, still from actually facing up to that.
On that note, what do you think of the term or the word Islamophobic or Islamophobia? Because I understand what people mean when they say it, but somebody was conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, and I'm sympathetic to the argument that you can have legitimate criticism of Israel, and it doesn't mean you hate Jews. And people often will say, people misuse that on both sides.
Sure.
But the same people who kind of will die on that hill, of course, will also say that you're Islamophobic for having a conversation like this. And I find it interesting because it seems like kind of the same thing.
Well, they are similar in certain rhetorical ways. I don't think they're at all similar.
Let me clarify what I mean. I feel like the word Islamophobia, it's not the same thing as racism. Like, you can have racism where you say, oh, you know, I don't like that people from these countries or whatever. That's racism. That's prejudice. Islamophobia seems like it's a made-up term to get you to not criticize Islamic.
It is a made-up term. It was made up by the Muslim Brotherhood some decades ago.
Can you explain that? I don't think people know that.
Yeah, it's a term, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is one of the most effective organizations, actually, of the latter half of the 20th century. They inserted this into the dialogue, and it really started to come to prominence in around the 1980s. And it was recognized, it was wheeled out because it was recognized by the Brotherhood and its affiliates to be a very useful way to cow particularly Westerners who do not want to be seen as bigoted. We in our societies in the West fear the charge of bigotry. And so if somebody uses it against us, even falsely, it can have a terrible stain.
It's like pedophile.
Yes, it's like
pedophile. And
absolutely.
Like you're stuck defending yourself in the completely ridiculous.
And some of it will stick. So it has been used very cynically as a tactic. Because it's a recent invention, there's been a lot of muddying of the waters, and a lot of people don't realize what it is, and they don't, you know, is it possible to criticize Israel without being anti-Semite? Yes. Is it possible to criticize any tenet of Islam or the behavior of any Muslim without being accused of Islamophobia? No. I mean, people think anti-Semitism is overused. Wait till they see Islamophobia. That is just, people get hosed down by that. And I reject it because, among other things, well, first of all, it's inexact as a term because a phobia is an irrational fear of something. And there's every reason to have a rational fear of aspects of Islam. fundamentalist Islam is something one should be rationally fearful of, concerned about, worried about. The second thing is that it seems to me that it sets up an entirely impossible situation, which is if you are going to be accused of Islamophobia for criticizing, for instance, jihadism, Muslim radicalism, Muslim Brotherhood style activity, ISIS style activity, pointing out that groups like ISIS, groups like Hamas, they do quote Islamic scripture all the time, and they believe they have the correct interpretation of the Quran, Hadith, the life of Muhammad. Can you have any of that discussion without being accused of Islamophobia? No, not really. I mean, we've been trying for decades, and we in the West have been dancing around this. But, you know, you can be the most secular leftist French cartoonist, showing that you are trying to have the right to ridicule the Muslim faith in the same way as you ridicule the Jewish faith and the Christian faith and all other things, and you'll be called an Islamophobe. And in the cases of Charlie Hebdo, you'll have your offices shot up and your staff murdered in Paris in 2015. Thing of turning rational, like, is it a phobia of cartoonists in Europe to worry about a man with a Kalashnikov coming through the door if you draw a cartoon that is said to offend the sensibilities of some Muslims? That's not an irrational fear. It's a totally rational fear. And once you go down from that, there's a whole set of other things which are totally rational fears. I have a completely rational fear of, for instance, what I see as being the accelerating backwards bigotries in societies that import very large numbers of people from certain Muslim cultures without integrating them, because I think that there are terrible problems that can come along with it. We in Britain had a very, very visceral one in recent decades with the rape gangs in the north of England, and not just in the north of England, but across England, which were gangs of Muslim men who were, it sounds like an obscene far-right fantasy, but oh no, it happened, where thousands of young white girls, many working class, were groomed and gang raped by men who were doing it because the girls were white and because they believed that they were, as famously been said, easy meat. And now, when we became aware of that, I remember this very, very clearly in the UK, when we became aware of that in the 2000s, the story was covered over because Muslim groups and others said it was Islamophobic. And Channel 4 and other media entities who, you know, are left-wing, when they tried to look at the story, were accused of bigotry and Islamophobia and told to shut up. And when a left-wing Labour MP mentioned this, she was called a racist and an Islamophobe and told to shut up, even though this was happening to young girls in her own constituency. And when care workers got worried that children were disappearing from the care homes, they were told to shut up because they were Islamophobic, and so on and so on. So, yes, people can use all sorts of terms to try to shut down their opponents or their critics. And we have lived through a period where that has been done with enormous liberality by a lot of people who have called anyone they don't like racist, anyone they don't like misogynistic, or anyone they don't like homophobic or transphobic or whatever. We've got a long period of the name calling. And some of it has been very effective, and some of it has been deliberately disingenuous. And I think the Islamophobia one is one example of that. The effects of that are terrible. And by the way, the inevitable effect of all of that, going back to your point about possibility of electing actually far-right governments, or certainly governments with much stricter, perhaps potentially unpleasant policies, is the same thing. This stuff has been thrown around so much that people don't believe it anymore.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, look, if Donald Trump can arrest people who are here undocumented and essentially deport them to a country outside of the United States, or that might not even be their own country, it can easily happen. I mean, we've seen worse things happen in Europe in the last century anyway.
Well, the most likely thing is that, the populations, particularly in Europe, will be pushed to so much unhappiness about this that they snap in some way. And we've seen little glimpses of that, and it's very unpleasant, very, very ugly. And that's why there's some people who occasionally become well known, mainly online. There's one, I won't name him, but who is an activist in Birmingham in the UK, a Muslim activist, and he was once again on video recently saying, we're not here to integrate, we're here to take over. And I watched that, and I don't think, oh gosh, you're such a tough guy. I just think, you effing idiot. You have no idea, or at least, or maybe you do have an idea, which makes you even worse, of what you're actually doing. What you're trying to do is you're trying to needle the country that's hosted you and allowed you and your parents and your siblings in. You are needling them and hoping that they are going to react in a way that can make you say, aha, I told you. Such a stupid and irresponsible thing to do.
It's extremely cynical, because these guys will not be on the front lines of whatever conflict they spark, most likely. They'll be the ones making TikTok videos about it, but they will not be the ones whose houses are burned down. They'll be vacationing abroad, coincidentally, when this all goes down.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're probably right.
I've been to Egypt before a long time ago. I've been to Israel before. I've been to Gaza before. It was the year 2000. So it was before all this.
Before the withdrawal.
Before the withdrawal. And when I was in Gaza, I found it to be, I was staying with a lovely, the father worked for the Palestinian Authority, but they had a Hamas flag in their house that was up on the wall. I had my own floor because they didn't want the girls in the house to see me without my shirt on and stuff. And the brothers had their own room and another floor, and the parents had their own floors. Quite a nice house, and the roof was open. We'd all hang out on the roof at night and eat these giant trays of olives and all this stuff. It was quite memorable. And I remember asking if I could take a picture of the guy holding the Hamas flag, because I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was an interesting looking flag, and I thought it was and then the brother said, no, don't take a photo of it. And I said, why? And he said, well, my dad works for the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas is like the other political party. And I said, well, how do you have both? How can your dad work for that? Is he going to get mad if you know? No, my dad knows that he's secretly, we're pro Hamas, but he works for the PA. And I found that to be really confusing, although it made way more sense, of course, over the last 25 years, quite a bit about this. And the idea that you could be sort of complicit in one but secretly rooting for the other was very, very common. And I'll never forget that it was never anything that went wrong. I mean anything. Like I remember one of the brothers stubbed his toe, and he said something, and I said, Why do you say, what is that word? Because I thought he was swearing in Arabic. And the sister goes, oh, he said, damn Jews. And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, oh, he says that whenever he like drops something, kicks something. And I said, does everyone say that? And he said, no, it's kind of, we do, but not everybody. There's other words to swear in Arabic. And then there was a bad smell one day because the wind has changed. And they said, it's the wastewater treatment plant. Usually it blows that way, and then it blows this way, but we want it to blow towards the Jews. And my friend Natanya, who is Jewish and friends with these people, that's how I got to go there in the first place. She was like, can you stop doing that? You know, it's making me uncomfortable. We're Jewish too. And they were like, it's so hard to break these habits because this is how everyone talks. And that was shocking to me. I had a Hebrew textbook because I was learning Hebrew. And they said, can you put that away? It's offensive. And I was like, it's just Hebrew language. And the one brother's like, it's fine. I'll help you with your homework. I speak Hebrew too. But he and my brother and my dad and my mom, they all got offended by just even seeing that. And that to me is like, it just really signifies how much hatred there was. If you can't even imagine your country's at war with Iraq and you see Arabic written on a menu in New York and you storm out of the place. Sir, what's wrong? I can't believe there's Arabic on this menu. I mean, at some point, it's like you got to get it together. How do you function? If your entire life is grievance, how do you get anything done?
Well, you don't.
You don't.
You don't. You spend your time trying to bring down the person who you think is causing you all of these problems in your life. And again, as I quoted in The War in the West, Nietzsche famously says in The Genealogy of Morals, when you're in that position, you do need somebody to stand over your life and say, you're right, there is somebody holding you back. There is somebody who's destroying your life. The person is you. Yeah. Not many people want to audition for the role of saying that to people, let alone to Gazans in the 2000s.
Ironically, these kids, the reason we were able to go there, my friend knew her because my friend Natanya was this woman's floor mate in a university in the United States where all of them had gone to school. So they were educated in the U.S., from Gaza, from Rafah. So this isn't even like, well, they've never seen anything outside of their little city. They've never they've never had any advantages. No, they had passports. They vacationed in London and New York.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily inoculate you to hatreds.
No, I thought that was really interesting because my whole life had been taught the more you're exposed to things, the more everyone gets along.
I remember,
those days?
I remember speaking to somebody from the PA in Ramallah many years ago when I was there, who explained to me that, he'd studied at the London School of Economics, and he came back in order to pursue his fantasy of anti-Israelism, having spent, 3 years in London. And as it happened, he he swum in warm enough waters at the London School of Economics. But again, we seem to have an idea or a presumption, which maybe we both had at some point, that if not now, that Western societies can inoculate people to irrational bigotries. That's clearly not true.
Mm-hmm.
It's clearly not true. It may work with some people, but there'll be a lot of people who it makes no difference to at all.
One strange tension. I wanted to ask you this because I'd never gotten an answer to this. When I was in Egypt, people really hated Israelis. I mean, it was like, hey, what are you guys doing here? Are you tourists? Oh, yeah, I'm studying in Israel and I came here on a trip. And they're like, oh, okay, well, you should say Palestine because, anyway, let's go to this bar and they serve alcohol and I don't drink, but I know you guys probably do. And we can play pool. I mean, that was the conversations I was having. And I remember that I was talking with someone and I said, why is everyone still so angry about Israel? Is it because you lost the war in 1973? And the guy goes, what are you talking about? And I said, the 1973 war, you lost. Is everyone like, why is everyone? We didn't lose. And I'm thinking, wow, you might want to watch the movie again, pal.
As you know, I tell a very similar story in my book. I had exactly the same experience.
That was what flagged it for me. Because I was like, oh my gosh, this wasn't just an isolated incident.
No. They think they won the 6-Day War.
Yeah. You have Google. We had Google. We had Google back then. We had history books back then.
Again, our presumption is that if you introduce somebody to the facts, their mind will change. Unfortunately, that is the case with some people, but by no means the case with everybody.
Yeah. Egypt was both phenomenal and scary at the same time.
It's a good description of the country.
Amazing place. People kind of all over the map, really. I mean, there was a waiter that I loved. We were in Dahab. There's a beachside cafe. Have you ever been down there? There's like pillows all over the beach and these little kind of restaurants. And you just sit there and you order food and like 3 hours later it comes. But you don't care because you're on a vacation and you're looking at the ocean, right? And I remember this waiter was such a nice guy. He was always giving us free stuff. And he's like, try the mango shake. I know you ordered the watermelon, whatever it was. I'm bringing you this, my favorite thing today. Wouldn't let us order. We took half the things off the bill. It's just a really nice guy. And on the last day, he goes, well, there's Israelis back there. I put the poison in the food so they're going to puke and shit everywhere. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, they're going to be so sick in about 20 minutes. Just watch. And I was like, I can't. I have to tell them. And he's like, don't tell them. What's wrong with you? I thought we were friends. I'm like, I can't let you poison somebody at the table behind me because they're Jewish. What are you doing? So I told them and they left and the guy was like really upset and chasing after, oh, I didn't mean it. I was just kidding. I don't think he was, but it was so hard it was confusing for me, right? Because he knew we were Jewish. He knew we were studying in Israel and it wasn't a problem. It was nice to us the whole week. 2 Israelis walk in. Hey, I poisoned those 2 Israelis behind you. Set your watch. 20 minutes. They're going to be.
I mean, it's one of the tragedies, in my view, of much of the Arab world, that instead of developing their own societies, the leaders of many of the countries have successfully diverted their populations onto hating Israel because there is no way to improve their own socioeconomic standing.
Yeah, that makes
sense. It's sad for the Israelis, but it's a disaster for the Arab world.
I just never experienced anything. Look, coming from Michigan, I'd never experienced anything like that. That's why it stuck with me for a quarter of a century. But a lot of it was never really explainable until recently. And reading books like yours and thinking like, oh, okay, now that we're being bombarded with the information about this conflict and its history, a lot of this makes a little bit more sense.
I've had a challenge out since the start of this conflict when I've said to people who think that they understand the conflict, think that they, by being, let's just say fanatically anti-Israel, that they are at the heart of this and understand it. I say the same thing. Okay, going back to where we started, 10,000 Americans are stolen today from Manhattan and they're taken into neighboring New Jersey and they're dispersed across the territory. And the territory has been built up for 18 years to have an unbelievably complex and intricate and well-dug set of tunnels underneath New Jersey. And all of the hospitals are used as sites for storing weapons. And all of the mosques and all of the schools and all of the UN sites that are there all have tunnel entrances in them and caches of arms and much more. How do you get your 10,000 American hostages out from New Jersey with minimal civilian harm to any innocent civilian in New Jersey? Tell me your plan. Or for that matter, show me your battle plan for how you would have done Gaza after the 7th. How would you have got the 250 hostages back home? And how would you have killed or captured all the leadership of Hamas who are responsible for this and make sure Hamas could not run the Gaza again? And I have yet to hear a plan. I hear people saying, so just finally, I hear people saying things like, well, if you notice the hostage negotiations, the hostage releases have come as a result of negotiation. That is something I hear from some people. You've no idea. It does not come because Hamas wakes up one morning, or the leadership wakes up and decides they'd like to hand back some Israelis today. It happens because of intense military pressure on them, their group, their leadership, and then to buy some time, they occasionally release some emaciated Israelis. And what's anyone else's plan for it? And I don't hear any. I don't actually have many people, I think, who've taken me up on that seriously. And I think it's because they're not serious. They're not actually serious about it.
A lot of people say, well, if Israel would release the Palestinian prisoners that they have, then they would get the hostages back. But I don't remember that ever, first of all, seriously being on the table. It was, we're going to take these prisoners back, and then they're going to join Hamas, and then we're going to do October 7th again. That's what we're going to do. I remember them saying pretty much exactly that. It wasn't you release all our people, we'll release all yours, and we'll live in peace, and everything will be fine. That was not ever on the table.
No. I just saw yesterday a big protest that was happening in Amsterdam yesterday against Israel. So let me throw it out there. Why might the Dutch want to accuse the one Jewish state of genocide? It's not hard to work out psychologically. If you've been brought up in Amsterdam and you've passed Anne Frank's house many times and been taken around it, and you know that your forebears collaborated, failed to stand up to Nazi fascism, and colluded to a very great extent in the deportation and murder of the Jews of that country, yeah, you would love it to have the opportunity to accuse a Jewish state of genocide, because then everyone's done genocide and we can be let off in the Netherlands. That's a very significant driver for some people. In the same way, again, going back to the thing that's beneath or beyond reason, it seems that there are a lot of people who don't have very much, I don't want to be needlessly insulting, seek purpose and meaning in their life. They want a grand story to be a part of. They, particularly some young people, the stats show that in America and the wider West, have decided to hitch themselves to a big cause. And the big cause that some of them have decided to hitch themselves to is the cause of Palestinianism, and then down the road from that, the cause of Hamas, Hezbollah, and so on. It seems to give them purpose. It certainly gives them something to do. They get the great opportunity of saying, no one will be free until this happens. And I think that's delusional, but again, it's understandable. There are significant numbers of people, evidently, clearly, in our societies in the West who deeply lack meaning in their lives and wish to attach themselves to things that seem meaning-filled. And the great cause of liberation, for instance, liberation of oppressed people, is a cause. And unfortunately, significant numbers of people have decided to attach themselves to the anti-Israel cause in the belief that that is a cause on the side of people who need liberation, of course, assisted by white people in the West who would normally be accused of either colonialist thinking or of white savior complex. But as we know, again, those charges don't happen if they go in a certain direction.
It's 2025. America's debt is over $37 trillion, and the dollar just had its worst crash since 1973. That puts your savings and your family's future at risk. That's why we trust Alpha Omega Gold, a company that stands unapologetically with Israel and supports Stand Tall Israel. Visit ao.gold/stand to claim your free precious metals wayfinder guide or call 1-855-426-4653 today. Protect your future before it's too late.